I didn't tell anyone where it was going. Not because I had something to prove, but because I didn't want anyone to talk me out of it. There was no grand plan, just a slow-burning ache that had spread through my chest for years, eating away at the parts of me that used to feel alive. The job, the city, the noise, it all blurred into this meaningless hum. Every day was just another checkbox, another nod, another performance. I was losing myself by staying. And so, one morning before sunrise, I packed my gear, locked my apartment door behind me, and disappeared into the quiet. The mountain wasn't on any tourist blog or social media reel. That was the point. No marked trails, no friendly park ranger stations, just raw, indifferent wilderness and elevation that promised silence. The first day was almost romantic. The trees embraced me like I was welcome, like they knew I belonged. The air tasted sharper than anything I'd breathed in years, and the weight on my back felt good, earned. I was drenched in sweat before noon, my legs sore by evening, but I slept like I hadn't in months. Curled up in my tent under a fading sky, I felt something close to peace. But by the second day, that glow faded. The trail grew steeper, more jagged. The altitude pressed against my lungs and the wind turned cold. Silence wasn't soothing anymore. It was vast, loud. My thoughts, once dulled by the buzz of city life, now shouted in my skull. Regrets came like echoes. Faces. Decisions I wish I could unmake. People I left behind, or worse, drove away. I was starting to realize I hadn't climbed this mountain to find peace. I'd climbed it to feel, to strip everything away until there was nothing left but whatever raw truth I'd buried so deep it had stopped screaming. By the third night, my hands shook from exhaustion as I pitched the tent. I hadn't seen another soul since I started the ascent. No birds, no animals, just wind and rock, and that quiet that makes you confront things you've spent years hiding from. I stepped outside for a piss and looked up. The stars. God, the stars. They didn't twinkle the way they do in movies. They burned. Sharp, cold fire scattered across the black. I stood there, breath fogging in the dark, feeling like a speck, like an accident with a heartbeat. There was something holy about it, and terrifying. I thought I came here to escape my life, but standing under that sky, I realized maybe I came here to remember how small I am. And maybe that's okay. Because somewhere between the weight of the pack and the ache in my bones, I felt something stir in me. Not hope, not yet, but a question. If I stripped everything away, what would be left? That night I dreamed of falling. I woke before the sun, my breath misting in the cold air of the tent. Every muscle in my body ached. My fingers were stiff from the freeze, and the skin on my lips had cracked overnight. But there was something else, a tension I couldn't place, like the mountain was holding its breath. I packed slowly, not because I was tired, but because the quiet felt different, not just empty, expectant, like I was being watched, or maybe judged. The path ahead was steep, more rock than trail now. My boots slipped more than once on the frost-slick stones. My legs burned and my lungs felt thin. Every step was a conversation with my own willpower. But still, I climbed. By midday, I stopped to rest on a narrow ridge. I sat on a flat boulder, drinking what little water I had left, when something shimmered in the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, sun bouncing off ice or a stray reflection from my gear. But when I looked again, I saw it, a glint of silver, maybe 100 yards up the slope, half buried behind a jagged outcrop. Sharp, unnatural, metal.
It didn't belong there. Not at this altitude. Not this far from any flight path or hiking route. A chill ran through me. Not from the cold. My brain scrambled for logical explanations. Maybe a lost weather drone or some wreckage from a hiker's camp. But deep down, I knew better. I couldn't look away. Every part of me screamed to turn back, to leave it alone, to pretend I never saw it. But my feet had already moved before I finished the thought. The slope was treacherous, snow-packed and loose, and I had to scramble on all fours in places. My heart pounded, not from exertion, but something older, primal. As I climbed closer, more of it came into view. The rounded curve of a fuselage, jagged metal torn open like a wound, strips of white paint faded by weather, and a shattered engine cowling resting like a broken jawbone on the rock. It was a plane, a private jet from the looks of it. Sleek, or it had been once. Now it looked like something the mountain had tried to swallow whole. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. There was no smoke, no fresh wreckage. It had been here a while. Years, maybe. Left to rot in silence. The air around it felt heavier, as if I'd stepped into a place I wasn't meant to see. The oddest thing was how quiet it was. Not just the usual mountain silence. This was deeper, like sound refused to exist here. I approached slowly, every step crunching in the snow, like it might break something sacred. I reached out and touched the cold metal. It felt smooth beneath my glove. Real, solid, and wrong. The door to the jet was twisted off its hinges, hanging half open. Darkness waited inside. I didn't go in. Not yet. I just stood there, staring into the shadowed maw of the wreck, feeling like I'd stumbled, not into a crash site, but into a secret. And something inside me whispered, "You aren't supposed to find this."
It took me almost half an hour to convince myself to go inside. I stood at the torn open door like I was at the edge of a grave. The silence around the jet pressed in like a weight. I half expected a corpse to fall out the moment I touched the frame, but nothing moved. Nothing breathed. I turned on my headlamp, its narrow beam cutting through the dark like a knife, and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the cold. It was colder inside the wreck than out in the open air, as if the jet held on to death. The interior was barely intact. Seats were ripped from the floor, some twisted and bent as if yanked by invisible hands. Overhead compartments hung open or lay shattered across the floor. The luxury was still visible. Leather seats, sleek finishes, gold trim dulled by time and frost, but it had all rotted into something haunted. But what struck me most was what I didn't find. No bodies, no blood, just emptiness. I moved slowly, careful where I stepped. The floor panels creaked, some bending slightly under my weight. I passed a collapsed bar, its liquor bottles shattered. Flakes of dark glass crunched beneath my boots. The cockpit door was ajar, but the control panel was dead. Torn wires hanging like vines. 2 pilot seats sat empty, turned slightly as if the pilots had left in a hurry. Still, no sign of death. No bones, no clothes, nothing. I started to think maybe the plane had been stripped by scavengers. Maybe whoever crashed it was rescued or abandoned it before anyone else found them. But that didn't explain what I saw next.
In the back of the cabin, past a broken divider, I found signs of life, recent life. Empty tins, soot stains from a fire pit made in the aisle, a pile of old blankets. Someone had camped here after the crash. And then I saw it. A leather-bound notebook wedged under a seat. I pulled it free carefully, my hands shaking. The cover was cracked and warped from moisture, but the pages inside were mostly legible. The handwriting was messy, rushed, but it was unmistakably human. I flipped through it quickly, scanning phrases. No rescue coming. Food low. Water worse. He says the satellite phone is fried. He's lying. We can't trust her. She's hiding something. I heard them arguing again last night about the briefcase. Briefcase. The word struck me like a slap. This wasn't just survival. There had been conflict, secrets, paranoia. I sat down hard on a broken seat, the metal biting through my coat. My heart pounded. This wasn't just a crash site. It was a story. A sealed room mystery scattered on a mountain. They were alive, at least for a while, and something had broken them more than the fall ever could. I looked around the cabin again, this time not just seeing decay, but evidence, clues. The jet wasn't just a tomb. It was a time capsule, a flying mausoleum filled with silence, secrets, and someone's last desperate thoughts. And the question I couldn't shake was no longer what happened. It was, where did they go?
I should have left. I knew that. I should have taken a few photos, closed the notebook, and walked back down the mountain with a story no one would believe. But I couldn't. Something about the wreck clung to me, like the moment I touched that journal, I'd inherited their unfinished ending. So I kept coming back. Each morning, I'd climb the short ridge from my camp to the plane and sit inside for hours, combing through what was left. Not just the notebook, but every drawer, every seat back, every inch of the cabin. The wind outside howled sometimes, but inside it was always the same. Still, cold, expectant. That's when I found the scratches. At first I thought it was just damage, gashes in the wall paneling, maybe from the impact. But they were too deliberate. Vertical marks, deep and narrow, clustered around a corner near the back exit, almost like tally marks, or clawing. Then I found the second notebook. It was smaller, more like a pocket journal, stuffed between the cushions of a seat that had been half ripped from the floor. Inside, fewer entries, but more frantic handwriting, pages torn out, sentences started and abandoned. They're not dead. They left us. There's something in the briefcase. It wasn't just data. She said we couldn't contact anyone, that it's safer this way. I woke up and the door was open. It was snowing. Her prints just ended. God help me. I think she walked out on purpose. A pit opened in my stomach. Someone left the wreck willingly. Into the cold. No gear, no chance of survival. But why? And then I saw them. Just outside the jet, where the snow had thinned from recent wind, drag marks. Subtle, faded, but unmistakable. Something, or someone, had been pulled. I followed them as far as I could. They led into a narrow passage between the cliffs, half filled with snow and debris. I moved carefully, my heart hammering.
The trail faded quickly, swallowed by the terrain, but one thing was clear. They didn't stay at the crash site. Not all of them. They took something, and they left. Maybe under duress, maybe by choice. Back at the plane, I sat in the aisle beside the cold ashes of their fire and stared at the warped ceiling. My breath fogged in the dim light. It hit me then. Not as a theory, but as a certainty. This wreck wasn't forgotten. It was abandoned. Carefully. Deliberately. Whatever happened here wasn't just a tragedy. It was a decision. A secret, buried in steel and snow. And as I sat there in the freezing dark, I felt the weight of it settle on my chest, like the mountain wasn't just holding their silence. It was daring me to break it.
I'd planned to follow the drag marks the next day, packed my gear, marked the direction, even mentally mapped my route through the cliff pass. But the mountain had other plans. The storm came without warning. It was mid-afternoon when the sky shifted. One moment, thin sunlight filtered through the clouds. The next, a wall of gray rolled over the peak like a tidal wave. The temperature plummeted. The wind screamed. I barely made it back to the wreck before it hit. I dragged myself inside and wrestled the door shut, wedging it with a metal rod. The wind battered the fuselage so hard I thought it might rip apart all over again. Snow blasted against the broken windows, whistling through the cracks like a chorus of ghosts. I huddled in the back, wrapped in every layer I had, listening to the storm tear at the world. Then came the footsteps. Soft, deliberate, inside the plane. At first, I told myself it was the metal expanding, the wind playing tricks. But then I heard it again, closer, heavier. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped. The curtain behind the galley shifted, not just swayed, moved, as if someone passed through it. I called out, "Hello?" knowing full well I was alone. No answer. Just the wind. And then something else. A voice. I swear to God, I heard a whisper, barely audible, like breath against my ear. "Not yours." I spun around, light from my headlamp sweeping the cabin, illuminating nothing but twisted metal and empty seats. No one was there. I backed into the far corner of the fuselage and didn't sleep. When morning came, the storm had buried everything. The drag marks were gone, the trail erased, like it had never been there at all. I stepped outside into a white abyss. My footprints from the previous day vanished. Even the shape of the wreck was now softer, like the mountain was already folding it back into itself. I didn't know what to believe, whether I'd heard something or if solitude had finally cracked me open. But deep down, I felt it. The mountain wasn't just a place. It was a vault, and something inside it didn't want to be disturbed. I didn't go back inside the plane for 2 days. I stayed near camp, conserving energy, rationing food, waiting for the mountain to calm. But mostly, I was afraid. Not of dying out there. I'd made peace with that. What I feared was what else I might find if I kept looking. But the pull was too strong. And so, on the third morning after the storm, I forced myself back into the wreck. The air inside had changed. It smelled different, stale, sharp, like metal and mold and something chemical. The cold had settled into the walls. My breath floated in the beam of my headlamp like cigarette smoke. I found the envelope
tucked behind a false panel in the cockpit. It wasn't sealed tight, just taped at the edges, hidden. Yellowed paper, the kind that crackles when you move it. My hands trembled as I peeled it open. Inside were documents. Not personal papers, not passports or journals. No. These were printed contracts, memos, technical schematics, stamped with government seals, some real, some faded, some redacted with thick black lines. One had a classified watermark, half erased by time and moisture. Another bore the letterhead of a corporation I vaguely recognized from news headlines, one tied to international defense deals and quiet scandals. My eyes moved too fast to process it all at once, but pieces jumped out, like asset transfer, undisclosed location, high-level encryption protocol, burn after transmission. Subjects contain volatile cognitive data sets. See Addendum 7. In case of breach, initiate denial strategy. Full compartmentalization required. Passenger manifest falsified. Ensure fallback narrative is ready. I dropped the paper like it had burned me. This was no ordinary flight. This jet wasn't transporting people. It was transporting secrets. People who carried knowledge, leverage, whatever had been in that briefcase, whatever the survivors fought over, it had to do with this. Not survival, not rescue, containment. Maybe the crash wasn't an accident. Maybe it was cleanup. I sat back on the floor of the cockpit, the wind howling faintly through the cracks in the fuselage, heart thudding in my chest. The survivors didn't leave to find help. They left to hide something. Or maybe to make sure it never reached the world again. For the first time since I found the wreck, I considered what this made me. Not a hiker. Not a witness. A liability. The kind of person they write out of history before the ink dries.
I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I repacked my bag before dawn, shoving the papers deep between layers of clothing to keep them dry. Every time I folded a document, I hesitated, like the sound of paper might echo too loud in that haunted silence. I didn't take everything, just what I thought mattered. Enough to prove this happened. Enough to show someone, anyone, that I didn't imagine it. And then I left. I took one last look at the plane as I descended from the ridge. Snow had swallowed half of it. The mountain was already erasing its mistake. My boots crunched across hard frost as I made my way down, slower now, more cautious. Not because of the terrain, but because something inside me had changed. Every snapped twig felt like a footstep behind me. Every bird call I didn't hear felt like a warning. I kept checking over my shoulder, but no one was there. Still, the paranoia settled in. It wasn't just that I'd found something dangerous. It was the question gnawing at the back of my mind. Had someone else survived too? Someone who didn't want this story told? What if they were still out here? I found a small rock shelf halfway down the slope and took shelter to rest. That's when I did something I swore I wouldn't. I opened the envelope again. This time, I looked closer, page by page. One had a list of initials and ID numbers. I didn't recognize any of the names at first, until I did. A former diplomat, a CEO linked to a global energy company, a biotech engineer who disappeared from headlines 5 years ago. Each name followed by a date. Not a birth date, an end date. Some were marked as deceased, others unconfirmed. I found the manifest, or what passed for one. 8 names. Only 6 entries were crossed out, which meant 2 people at minimum might have survived. Not just immediately after the crash, but long enough to escape, to disappear, long enough to cover this up. And here I was, walking down a mountain with the very thing they likely gave everything to bury. My skin crawled with the realization. I wasn't just carrying truth. I was carrying evidence. And suddenly, I understood why the air felt heavier, why the wind sounded like whispers, why I hadn't seen another human face in days but felt like I was never alone. I wasn't just descending from a mountain. I was walking into something bigger, something I couldn't walk away from unchanged.
I reached the tree line by late afternoon. The wind had softened, but the sky hung heavy with low clouds, casting a gray tint over everything. Civilization, what little there was of it, flickered in the far distance. A radio tower, maybe a ranger outpost, maybe just power lines. I could see the edge of the world again. And still, I hesitated. I turned back one last time. The mountain loomed, its ridges vanishing into mist. From where I stood, the wreck was no longer visible, just snow and stone, innocent and indifferent, like it had never offered up its secrets, like it hadn't clawed open the past and stuffed it into my pack. But I knew what was up there, and it was mine now. The air felt different the moment I crossed the threshold back to the world, as if the silence I'd been breathing for days had been replaced with noise again, even if no one was speaking. I reached a ranger station by nightfall. I gave them a version of the truth. I'd gotten lost, been out longer than I planned. They believed me, more or less. They were used to hikers with sunken eyes and too many questions. I didn't tell them about the plane. Not yet. Not because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, but because I wasn't sure what they'd do if they did. In the days that followed, I tried to go back to my life, my apartment, my emails, the grocery store, but everything felt wrong, like I'd been stretched thin on that mountain and never snapped back into place. I kept the documents hidden. I didn't upload them, didn't send them anywhere. Not because I lost my nerve, but because I finally understood what it meant to know something too big. Some truths aren't just secrets. They're weights. You don't carry them. You inherit them. And once you do, you can't unknow them, can't unsee the silence, can't unhear the whisper in the fuselage, can't pretend the wreck never happened just because the world wants to forget. I still dream about them, whoever they were. The ones who walked away, the ones who left marks in the snow and names on paper, the ones who vanished before history could claim them. Maybe they're still out there. Maybe someone else will find the plane one day, and maybe they'll see the mountain for what it really is. Not just a climb or a view, but a vault of buried decisions. And maybe, just maybe, they'll have the courage to open the envelope and tell the story. Or maybe, like me, they'll carry it quietly, forever.